Hi, this is Roy Sorensen from Washington University in St. Louis, and I'm here with David Christensen of Brown University, who is the world's scariest epistemologist.
Not too scary, I hope.
Oh, he's the scariest one. He's more scary than the imaginary guys that Descartes whips up with his when he tries to get a certain kind of skepticism going. Um, I'm used to that kind of skeptic who is, they would say, well, maybe you don't know that you're sitting here at your desk because you could be dreaming, or there could be an evil demon who is making it seem that you're sitting at the desk talking to someone. Um, I'm not exactly sure on how to defeat such a skeptic and show that I know plenty of things, but I know plenty of things,
Yeah, right.
and I'm not going to. It's an interesting theoretical problem to figure out how I do know so much, but I'm not really in doubt that I know plenty. So it doesn't. So it's so it's like Zeno's paradoxes. I don't really worry about the existence of motion. I'm just concerned with how to diagnose what went wrong with Zeno. And that's a very important exercise. The diagnosis is really important. The mere fact that you can block a puzzle doesn't exhaust the interest of it. But David Christensen has a view which goes beyond that, which is more than me thinking I've got a problem diagnosing things, but I think one that really would affect my confidence in a lot of views. Um, David Christensen is a conciliationist or a proponent of the equal weight view. He thinks that if we have a disagreement and we are peers, then we ought to split the difference or average out. I'm going to let David clarify a bit more what his view amounts to.
Well, it's a view about how we should react to finding out that other people disagree with us. In particular, people who, apart from the disagreement, we think we have extremely good reasons to have a lot of epistemic respect for. And the kind of view that I have been arguing for is that when you find out that those kind of people disagree with you, it ought to considerably reduce your confidence in your own belief, to the point where, if, let's say, you believe P and the other person believes not P, if you really have excellent reason to believe that they are your epistemic peer, that they are as intelligent as you, as honest as you, as hardworking as you, that they've looked at all the same evidence that you have looked at, well, then you ought to suspend belief.
So what sort of situation do you have in mind that was a good illustration of your view?
Well, maybe the most persuasive illustration that I've come up with is an example where you've been going to restaurants with your friend for many, many years, and you always calculate the tip in your head. And most of the time, you're both correct. But on the rare occasions when one of you makes a mistake, you've kept track, and you make mistakes equally often. So you have these very, very long track records, which provides excellent reason to think that you're epistemic peers at bill calculation. So then tonight you go out for dinner, and the bill comes, and you do the math in your head, and you come out with a very strong confidence that your share of the bill is $43, and your friend says, no, it isn't, it's 45. Okay, now at that point, I think you should become much less confident that your share is $43 and basically become about equally confident that it's 45. That's assuming, of course, that, one of you hasn't drunk a lot more wine or had a lot more coffee, or neither of you seems to be particularly sleepy or alert or anything like that.
So if you have, what happens when you have, like, some people are pretty confident in themselves. uh, can you elaborate the example? So I suppose I just hold on to my number. Can you elaborate the example? So, uh,
So the question you're asking
suppose
is,
I don't. What would you do? You can make. I think you make. So if you have, so sometimes I have people who would stick to their view, but then I think you have other
yeah,
scenarios where you have a much larger dinner.
I guess that what I would say about the person who doesn't reduce her confidence in those kind of situations is that they're being irrational because it's pretty clear that one of the two people made a mistake. The overwhelmingly likely thing that happened is that somebody made one of the little undetectable mistakes in mental calculation that we all know that we make. And there's no real reason for me to assume that it's my friend rather than I who've made the mistake. So if I keep on being confident in my belief, that seems irrationally to be assuming that it was my friend who made the mistake this time.
Right. I suppose it turns out that the calculation was done correctly by me, and I was just doing what my evidence, says I should do. So, according to one view, I should proportion my belief to my evidence. That's the only thing that matters with informing beliefs. That's evidentialism, right? So there I am. I'm just nice. I've done the proper thing, and yet you seem to be criticizing me that I should be more sensitive to the other person's assessment.
Well, I guess whether we think that what I say that we should do is consistent with evidentialism or not depends on what we think the evidence really supports. So you could say the evidence really supports, let's say, the 43 view, the $43 sum, if in fact that's the correct solution to the arithmetic problem. But that's not the only way of understanding what the evidence supports. I would take it that we have not only the evidence that's given to us by the amount of the bill, but we also have important evidence given to us by the other person's belief. Part of this evidence suggests that I've made a mistake in my calculation, and
so this is this is higher order evidence. This is evidence about how they're assessing, how people are assessing evidence. Is that it?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So there are two kinds of evidence that you want us to heed. So we're used to thinking that we should heed the regular evidence that bears on the proposition in question. But you're saying that that doesn't exhaust all the evidence, that we should be interested in how well we're evaluating the evidence.
Yeah, and I think that kind of evidence is, even though it does come up in disagreement, it also comes up in lots of other situations. So supposing you're a pilot and you've heard about hypoxia, which happens to pilots and other people who go up to high altitudes where their brains get insufficient oxygen. And what happens in the earliest stages of hypoxia is that you feel totally fine. You feel mentally crisp and alert, but you're not. You're actually making lots of mistakes in judgment.
Yeah, they were hysterical the experimental reports, because some of the initial experiments, incidentally, were thought to be immoral to do on other people, so the experimenters did it on themselves. And so they had these really funny first-person reports. And they were just like you say, the people felt great, and until they just sort of passed out.
Right. So the idea is, supposing you're flying an airplane and you've decided you might want to go a little bit farther than you'd originally planned to. So you do some figuring to figure out whether you could make it on the amount of fuel you have to a somewhat farther away airstrip. And you become rationally very confident that you can. And then you notice by the altimeter that you're higher than you thought you were. In fact, you're now high enough so that in your unpressurized plane, you're at severe risk of hypoxia. Now, it seems to me that that's evidence that's very important for you to take account of, and it bears not only on some higher order matter, but indirectly it also bears on how confident you should be about whether you have enough fuel.
Okay, so now you've sort of taken us off there, so you got us to be out of the dinner scene where there's only a dollar or two at stake to a matter of life and death.
Yeah.
And now do I have to start thinking about, whether someone who doesn't believe that God exists, and then he's got equally well intelligent people who think that God does exist. The stakes have gone up even further now. You're worried about your afterlife and so on. So now it really seems important. So should the atheist average out, and should the theist average out if they think that they're peers?
If they think that they're peers, yeah. So that's a very hard question, I think. And a lot of the literature on disagreement so far has been concentrating on what you might call toy cases, cases where there are two people, and particularly where the people have the kind of track record that would give you the strongest possible evidence that the other person is in general just as good as you at doing a certain kind of figuring. Now, so that's what's extremely clear in the restaurant case, or in other of the cases that we've looked at, in some of the papers that have come out on this topic. And I think it's actually very hard to figure out how to take the lessons of those artificial cases and carry them over to real life questions like theism or atheism. So when I think about theism or atheism, I think, well, I know I'm an atheist. I know there are a lot of theists out there. Do I consider them my epistemic peers? What kinds of considerations do I take to be those which make somebody good at figuring out whether there are gods or not? And I think it's a lot less clear in the case of theism than it is in the case of the restaurant, or even that it is in the case of, let's say, fairly cold-blooded philosophical theses. Because when you get into religious theses, all kinds of emotional effects will influence our thinking, and it's hard to sort them out in a way that that gives, at least for me, a clear sense of who would be my peer and who wouldn't.
Well, maybe that's going to help. One of the reasons why I regard you as the scariest epistemologist is I feel all my distinctive views about things going gray. That I should be averaging out about I have a theory of stuff on vagueness, for example. I'm a partisan in this debate. I think that there are sharp thresholds for vague predicates. Very few people agree with me, and I have to concede that they're just as up on the literature and so forth. I'm got views about the nature, the solutions to various paradoxes. Lots of stuff like that. Stuff I spend day in and day out working, years and years. And then
I feel that pain. I definitely feel that pain. Because, I have those kind of views too. I have views on, let's say, whether rational belief is closed under conjunction, things like that. And I know that people disagree with me, and I have a great deal of epistemic respect for them. And those are the kind of issues that I think, unlike maybe the theism issue, those are the kind of issues where I kind of think I do know what makes somebody a good philosopher. At least I have, strong beliefs about what makes somebody a good philosopher. And it includes things like intelligence and familiarity with the literature and a certain kind of sensitivity to argument and honesty, of course. And, I've talked to the people who disagree with me, and they score high on all those. So for me, I do experience the graying out that you're talking about. I don't think that I can be very confident that, let's say, rational belief is not closed under conjunction or needn't be subject to consistency.
So is there a threat, though, it's going to gray out even further? So what about why not, with just crazy people? So if the thought is in the restaurant case, I think it's just equally likely he's right than I'm right. Now I might think that I might say, oh, he's just the fact he disagrees with me shows he's not quite as good as I thought, and I have evidence right here, and so I should demote him automatically because he disagrees.
Yeah, that's an important point. I think the whole kind of position that I like to push depends on the kind of move that you just talked about. It depends on my refraining from demoting my peer in the restaurant on the basis of the fact that she got 45 and the answer is 43. So, of course, whenever we disagree with somebody, we begin by thinking they're wrong about the topic under dispute. And to me it seems, anyway, that if you're really worried about figuring out who it was who made the mistake in thinking, that there would be something question-begging, let's say in the restaurant case, about me saying, one of us made a mistake in thinking. Which one was it? Let's see, the answer is 43. Oh, Roy got 45, so Roy must be wrong. So he made a mistake, so I don't need to worry. So the case for reducing belief depends on sort of walling off or bracketing part of my reasoning when I assess the other person. In other words, I'm not supposed to assess the other person down merely on the basis of the belief, of their holding the belief which I think is false.
Fair enough. Sounds very reasonable. But that sounds like something bad's happening next.
Yeah, so the worry then is going to be, well, if I'm supposed to be, let's say, bracketing what's in dispute between me and the other person, then what happens when I meet somebody who essentially denies pretty much everything I believe? Well, there it seems that if I bracket all the stuff that's in dispute, which is pretty much everything, I'm certainly not going to have any dispute-independent reason for thinking that I'm the one who did not make a mistake and he's the one who did make a mistake. So then don't I have to epistemically compromise with him? Right, so that's the worry, is that once you start bracketing to try to get the right answer in the restaurant case, then you're going to be swept into outrageous degrees of skepticism as soon as you meet somebody who, denies pretty much everything you believe.
So I can avoid that.
Now, here's how I'd like to avoid it. There's two different ways of thinking about how you evaluate the other person with respect to peerhood. One way is you think, well, I should compromise with him epistemically if I don't have any dispute-independent reason for favoring my own position, or for favoring the proposition that I'm more likely to have gotten it right than he is. And that's the kind of formulation that would get us in trouble with skepticism. But I think we could do better. I think instead of saying that, we should say something like, I have to compromise epistemically when, putting aside the matters under dispute, I have positive, very strong evidence for taking the other person to be equally likely to get the thing right as I am. So that's what I have clearly in the restaurant case. In the restaurant case, the long track record is precisely a very strong reason for me to believe that my friend is equally likely to get that matter right.
So there's no presumption of equality, that you don't get it just by default.
Yeah.
You got to earn it.
That's right. There's no presumption, and the person who denies everything, so that that there's virtually nothing dispute independent for me to use to evaluate him on. Well, it's not the case in that situation that I have strong dispute independent reasons for counting him as my peer. So you got the epistemic respect that you have to give to the other person, which might cause you to lose confidence in some of your beliefs. That epistemic respect has to be earned.
So there's other ways people talk about testing for peerhood. So what about this probability test? If I figure that Dave is just as likely to get this kind of question correct as I am, that makes us peers in my eyes. Is that correct? Just go.
That seems like a good gloss.
Because now we skipped all the stuff about the virtues, and all we care about is just going to why we're interested in the intellectual virtues, only because of the probabilities, right? Okay.
Yes. I think ultimately that's right, because we think that, intelligence and things like that are
Right.
important because they cause people to
Right.
get
And if
stuff
we were,
right.
sometimes you're in unusual positions where intuition does better. Uh, I heard that if you want to make your judgments align best on jam with what the experts say, it's important that you not think about it, that you just taste the jam. Yeah.
Really?
Or if you're on face recognition, this is more practical significance. I've heard that it backfires if you verbalize that much about the person's face. It interferes with it.
Oh, really? It makes you
Yeah,
less
so there are
reliable?
some of these
Oh,
psychologists who stress the importance of
that's really
intuition.
interesting.
It's
Uh-huh.
not as it's generally you are better being analytical, but there are some important cases where it backfires.
Uh-huh, where you're
Yeah,
overthinking
so it
it.
looks like the probability criterion works well then, whereas the intellectual virtue criterion, or at least the exercising of the virtues,
Yeah.
wouldn't work as well.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that feeds right into what you said, which is that the intellectual virtues are important precisely because they lead, at least in many
Yeah.
cases, to the
I
probability
was also
test.
thinking that it's important in how you select the peer. Suppose I mean, for almost any view you have, I could fish up some peer who disagrees with you. So that
Yeah.
there might be 99 out of 100 who agree with you, but I'll be able to find that 100th guy who disagrees. And
Right.
if you know that I've selected that person that way, uh, that peer is not going to have the same influence on you, right?
Right. Yeah, one thing we haven't talked about is numbers, and that hasn't been talked about much in the literature because the literature has mostly been toy
Mm-hmm.
two-person examples. But if we're really thinking about the real world, of course the numbers are going to count. And you can see that even by toy examples with
Mm-hmm.
numbers of people. So if 10 people are at the dinner table and 9 of them get one answer for what our shares of the bill is, and one person gets the other answer, then we're all going to think that the answer that's gotten by the 9 people is more likely to be correct. And something like that's going to happen in public controversies as well, although there are going to be complications due to the fact that people's opinions are not necessarily as independent in that situation as they might be in the restaurant situation. So if 99 of the people are, blind followers of a guru, then it might not be that their opinions count 99, for 99
Right.
separate
Or the
people.
manner in which they form. So they make the stuff on belief polarization, where on political issues, people will there are certain fanatical groups that will be very well informed, but they only get their information from the source they already
Yeah,
agree with. And those people,
right.
although they're well informed, are not as you don't want to average out as well with them.
Right, yeah, they don't count as a lot of
Yeah,
separate people in a way.
right.
Because, I mean, the fundamental idea is that we're trying to catch our
Mm-hmm.
epistemic mistakes. And, we, just like you can catch the mistake in your thermometer by noticing that it disagrees with other reliable thermometers, you can catch the mistakes in your thinking by noticing that you disagree with other
Uh,
reliable thinkers. And, the more thermometers or thinkers on one side, if they're independent, the more
yeah.
of that kind of evidence you
So
get.
one thing that's going to be making you different than I mean, you're as part of this being scary is that you're scarier than the other scary people, or you scare them. So the scary skeptics, who they think that they want to have doubts about whether they have hands and so forth. They
Right.
should be worried by you because um, it seems like you're going to be winding you wind up agreeing with a lot of like what G.E. Moore says when in his defense of common sense he gives this long list of propositions which have been denied
Mm-hmm.
by many philosophers and also or they at least either deny it or they say they don't know it. So G.E. Moore
Yeah.
thinks that it's plain that he's had his breakfast before his lunch, suggesting that time is real. He believes that
Yeah. Uh-huh.
there's he's lived at or near the surface of the Earth for many years. He
Right.
believes the Earth's been
Yeah.
around for many, many years.
Yeah.
He thinks
I mean, if many is over 10,000, that's
Yeah.
controversial.
Oh, Moore did not count that God exists, interestingly, as a common sense
Uh-huh.
proposition. But he has a pretty long list, and I
Uh-huh.
think you sign off on all of them, and you also have you have some reason that's distinct from him. You're you can point to all these people who are your peers who believe all these things. Um, so this seems to be bad for the skeptic. The skeptic prides himself on being rational, and insofar he admits
Uh-huh.
that there are these other people who are just as rational as he is, and just as well, I guess, informed as well as a skeptic can be. But
Yeah, right.
they're going to say that. They're
Yeah.
not going to say they're less informed. I guess they're going to say we're all, they equal us out in other ways. Um, that they can't really afford to average out. They're under rational pressure here to abandon their skepticism.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. At least if they're gonna, once they concede that the other people who disagree with them are real, then they have, I think, exactly the problem you were describing.
I mean, there's other people, people who have these strong views. I mean, you're a little cautious about doing the politics and some other areas, but one of the reasons you scare me is that most of the views that I'm tempted to, the more, you know, real liberal about drug laws. For example, I don't want any drug laws. I think it's like
Uh-huh.
makes all this crime. It's like prohibition. It's bad like that.
Right.
That doesn't seem so common in view. It's maybe common in
Yeah.
academics, but not so common in the general population. Um, so, should I be averaging out and think, well, we should have maybe more prohibition? That seems I'm reluctant to do that. Um,
Yeah. Do you think the people who disagree with you about the drug laws, insofar as you can put aside your disagreement about drug laws, do you think that you have good reason to think that they would be as likely as you to get that kind of question right?
um, my guess, no, because
Yeah, I sort of guess no too. I'm not very good at explaining why, but at least my initial reaction is
I'm still
not
worried, though. I
necessarily.
mean, suppose I do think myself is better informed on the issues than 90% of people. I'm still worrying about this other 10%. Doesn't require a lot uh, of the population to be a worrisome group to form my
No,
peers. Um,
that's right.
it may be an ill-chosen example actually on the drug laws because actually it's very hard to find that much rational opposition, at least the ones that the academics will uh, qualify. But there are other issues on political stuff. I think
Uh-huh.
I can find
Sure.
differences, and it seems like getting a reason to stay home and not vote. Um, that who's to say? Who's to
Yeah, right. I mean, and one of the questions that people have raised is, I think, related to what you said about not voting. Is it seems that unless you think of yourself as pretty special epistemically, if you really think that you have vast numbers of peers out there on some issue, and if you have access to their opinions, then it would seem that on my kind of view, you don't have much reason to think about the issue directly, right? Insofar as you want
uh,
to get the rational belief, your your contribution is going
mhm.
to be pretty piddling,
Yeah,
right?
that's a labor saving aspect. Yes.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
well, maybe that's correct.
I mean, I
uh,
kind of think it is, or
uh,
at least I would think it is if my confidence weren't tempered by the
yeah, let's
fact
get
of
into that. So one
disagreeing.
of the things that another reason why I think you're so scary is because of the reactions I get from students. One of the students really want to refute you. They're much more
Uh-huh.
animated about refuting you than the Cartesian skeptic. I mean, I can compare most of these, in an
Huh.
intro class, I can get most of them. Say, okay, I know little, very little, and on to the next activity. But when I,
Right. Yeah, I don't have
yeah,
hands,
but
so
when
do
I
I.
when I
But
talk about, your views, they really want to show that you're wrong. So here's one kind of objection
uh-huh.
that they will alight on, a real zinger type of objection. They think that. So, what about that view itself? So this view that you give your peers equal weight, or this conciliationism, that itself is a controversial philosophical position. So it implies that you should abandon your own position.
You got some good students there coming up
Well,
with
they're
that.
trying. Boy,
Um,
they
yeah, no, that's certainly something that that has been pointed out, and I think it's a really interesting it's an interesting phenomenon. Um, I think that I don't, in the end, worry too much about whether that shows that the view is false.
Mhm.
Um, for one thing, I mean, there's no contradiction in supposing that the view is true, but that that I can't
Mhm.
rationally believe in it at this point. Um, and a second point is that if you think about um, pretty much any reasonable view about disagreement, or actually lots of views about what should make you lose confidence in beliefs in general, um, you'll find that a lot of them will fulfill the following condition, that in certain circumstances, the view will tell you not to believe itself. Um, so the proposition that if I believe P after thinking about it for 10 minutes while high, and then I find out that hundreds of people have been studying it very carefully and have soberly and intelligently come to the opposite conclusion, that I should lose confidence in P. That seems like a pretty sensible position, but it too will self-undermine in certain cases. We can describe a case pretty easily in which that principle would itself tell me not to believe it or to lose confidence in it. So the mere fact that a principle will self-undermine in certain conditions doesn't itself show that
Right.
the principle's wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty some from Derek Parfit's work on reasons and persons. Um, there, some people point out that utilitarianism implies that you ought, if suppose that it'll be bad consequences if you believe it. Well, then utilitarianism says, well, don't believe it.
Yeah.
Don't believe my theory.
Right.
It doesn't show that utilitarianism
Yeah.
is false. It can be limited as a. Well, anyway, you can divide the belief from
Yeah. No.
the truth. Uh,
Yeah. Now there's something more disturbing about the kind of view I want to push than about the silly view that I talked about a minute ago, the obviously true one. And that is that in the present circumstances, um, the view that I like does undermine itself. Because presently, many philosophers, many really good philosophers who I respect a lot,
mhm,
reject my view. So my view tells me,
mhm.
don't be so confident in me.
So when you get up and you lecture, I mean, do you feel bad? You think, oh gosh, I really ought to just lecture on stuff I believe. I get here they are. They treat me very nice.
Yeah.
They fly me in, and here I'm going to advocate for a view, and I don't believe the view. Golly.
Well, sometimes I've titled my talks, "Why You Should Not Believe the Conclusion of This Talk," which it actually makes the students more
Uh,
interested
uh,
in coming to the talk. Um, but I guess two things. One, I think it can make sense to um, advocate views that you
and
don't
so you're
fully believe.
you're not requiring maybe for a point of intellectual exploration or it just
Yeah, exactly. In fact, something strange when I've talked to different philosophers about my view, their their reactions have come into two categories. Um, there's one category that says, "What? You're telling me that I have to not believe in free will anymore? That's ridiculous. I can see where the other people are wrong.
mhm,
I can see
mhm.
why my view is right. Forget it." But then I think about an equal number of people say, "What? You believe your views in philosophy? I don't believe my views. I just argue for them. That's what we do." So, I don't actually think I'm
Mhm.
totally in that second camp of people who just
Yeah,
argue for
but
things because that's the position they've chosen. But I think
yeah,
it makes sense to do that, and it makes sense. I think in science, it certainly makes sense to have people exploring various
Yeah, but
different
then
theoretical
there's a
options.
difference. So in debating competitions, one of the things I'll do dramatically is I'll just flip a coin to decide which team will take which positions. I've never seen
Yeah,
any philosophy go that way. That people come in as lifelong
yeah,
partisans of a view, and those. Uh,
yeah. I try to make
uh,
my students do that in their papers, but I have to
well,
admit
actually, I
I
saw it
would
done
not find
once.
it fun.
Once I have to admit,
So,
it was a party that had it was Paul Churchland and Daniel Dennett, and at the reception they threw tablecloths over each of these philosophers and made gestures and did a mind transfer. And so the mind of Paul Churchland went into Dennett, and Dennett's mind went into Churchland, and then they proceeded to argue with one another, but from their opposite viewpoints. And they were
they
quite
did that?
good.
Oh, that sounds really cool,
They were
actually.
very good at arguing from the other's position. It was a very impressive performance.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely a good skill to have, but you are right. I mean, the second point I wanted to make, after saying that it's perfectly okay to advocate for positions that you don't really believe, that I have to admit that I do believe
Hmm.
some of my
Now, is it
philosophical
because,
views
right? So when I
more than I
read
think I should.
the psychology literature on overconfidence, people, so 90% of people believe that they're better than average drivers. 90% believe they're better
Yeah.
than X. Then they always put themselves. There's a real strong tendency for almost everybody to put themselves at the top half or even the top quarter. And they will also agree,
Uh-huh.
evidently, that most people are overconfident, but they're not. uh, and do you think this is
Right, right.
just part of this kind of buoyant human condition, which we just as we are not we're kind of overconfident, but maybe and also we don't bracket enough, and you're part of that. Is that it? Can't help yourself.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I mean, I guess, yeah, and I guess I do. The only difference I can think of between me and the people that you're talking about is
Uh,
I will say that I'm overconfident, but it doesn't have the effect on my ground level beliefs that
uh,
I
but it
think
sounds
it
like it
should
has
have.
some, doesn't it?
And I guess it can.
Uh,
I mean, it sort of ebbs and flows. When I really think about it and I think about my views on disagreement and I think hard about, let's say, how
mhm,
smart Tom Kelly is and things like that, right? Then I think, wow, I really can't be
mhm,
confident in this. It might well be false. I might be
mhm,
making a mistake. But then, I play backgammon and drink, and
mhm,
I become again confident in my
mhm.
ordinary views.
Yeah. Um, you don't sound that upset about these deviations from the rational ideal. Uh,
Well, I'm pretty resigned to being far from
uh,
ideally rational.
uh, but one of the, I mean, you in your key article on this, you talked about disagreement, but the good news that it's supposed to kind of help us be more moderate. Uh,
Yeah.
and so you think that even if we're not moderate enough, it still has some impact on us.
Yeah, right. I mean, the good news is really that the disagreement of other people can serve as a
Uh,
check on you, as something which can, tell you, hey, you
yeah.
might have been making a mistake
Now
there.
you generally talk about actual people, and I just wondered what about possible people? So when I can I just imagine a peer and use that as my check?
Yeah, that's a question. And I know Tom Kelly in his first paper on the topic argued that merely possible peers should be just as worrisome as actual peers, um, and that purely possible peers would only be um, problematic if they were rational. And so if I think that, if I think about purely possible peers and I think, oh yeah, they would be rational and disagree with me, then I should be worried. But then I should be worried anyway, because that would mean that my arguments for my own
Mm-hmm.
view aren't that good. But I actually think that it's not really true that purely possible peers are anything like the threat to the rationality of my beliefs that actual peers are. Because if you think about the role of actual peers as being kind of alarm bells in the sense that they are other reliable thinkers whose disagreement can indicate that your own thinking has gone awry, then they're kind of like, if you have a watch and you notice that other watches disagree, then even though you're generally confident in your watch, you will lose confidence in your watch. But if you have a nice watch and you're confident in it, and then it dawns on you that, in some possible world there's a watch that disagrees, that really shouldn't upset you much at all. So we all know that, we can make mistakes, but in thinking. But when we find out that people who seem to be just as well positioned as we are epistemically have come to disagree with us, and thus that one of us has made a mistake, that raises the probability that we made a mistake ourselves.
So let's not just be so indiscriminate to take any possible peer, but take one that is a kind of irrelevant one. So when people lose confidence in their religious affiliation, when they think about if they had been brought up, so a Christian thinks, well, if I'd been brought up a Muslim, then I would have Muslim beliefs. If I'd been brought up as a Jew, I'd have been Jewish beliefs. That makes them worried, and it seems that they're not just picking up a possible peer. it's
right. Yeah, those are actual. I mean, you can think of it in terms of if I'd been raised in,
well, it doesn't have to. He doesn't have to be.
House.
What about my? I didn't want to. So in the counterfactual, I have an actual person, as it were, going to another possible world. But just suppose that my imaginary twin. I don't have a twin, but the twin would just be like me in all relevant respects. If that twin had been raised as a Muslim, then I would be a Muslim. That kind of Now it does seem to be just purely possible, but very relevant.
Yeah, it does. It's partly relevant because we know there are actually people who are raised as Muslims and disagree with people who, have.
I guess I suppose I was a.
So I'm not sure that's different from the disagreement problem.
Well, I think that let me just press a little bit further. I mean, even if I were a solipsist, I think that I'm actually the only person. I think it would still be instructive to consider, well, if there were other people, what would they believe? If they're my peers, these possible people, then I would make adjustments for those people. So, my impression is that you're too. There's too much of a fetish with the actuality. That what we care about is we care about how things are selected, so that we don't want things rigged up. So just not whip up artificial possibilities. We don't also care about actual peers' disagreement, given that it was contrived that the talk show host just brought someone who is going to disagree with you, and you're not going to therefore average out.
Right.
So it's a matter of selection.
Yeah. That sounds right to me.
All right. So I wanted to also express another possible point of disagreement. I'm not sure. I talk to you. I have this tendency to to sort of be persuaded, or we wind up agreeing the same.
Excellent.
But the one of the things I think is that there are certain statements like "it is raining, but I do not believe it," or if I believe that, then I'd be open to rational criticism. That there's something inconsistent, even though there's not, the proposition itself isn't inconsistent. It's inconsistent for me to believe that.
Yeah.
And that makes it tough, if not tough for me to, or impossible for me to rationally believe it. But you don't have this hang up that I do about what when the Ayers are referring to Roy Sorensen.
So I can believe.
Right, and you do believe I have some false beliefs, as a matter of fact. So you can reel off some false beliefs with Sorensen, but I draw a blank. I can't come up with any, even though I know they're in there somewhere. I can
Right.
talk about my past false beliefs, I can talk about my future false beliefs perhaps, but not my present ones. So wouldn't this limit how much agreement? Couldn't we have a disagreement about such a proposition?
Sure, we could. So I could believe that it's raining, but Roy doesn't believe it, and you
Right,
could
that's
not
the
believe
idea.
that, right?
And as much as we
Okay.
debate it or share evidence, or as much as I esteem you as a peer, we're not going. We can't get consensus on it.
Right. So you're imagining a disagreement where what we're disagreeing over is one of these
Yes.
more sentences, and you're wondering
Yeah.
what to say about those. Um, so I guess there, are you imagining a case where
Hmm.
let's just fix on a real example. So it's raining, but Roy
Hmm.
doesn't believe
Yep.
it. Is that the example? Okay. So supposing I believe that, and what do you believe?
Oh, I believe that.
I know you're not believing that, but you're believing that you disagree with me about the rain part or about the what Roy
Oh,
believes part.
I could merely just disagree with the conjunction, but I mean you can choose as you wish. But either way, I don't see what turns on it.
So I guess, yeah, I'm not sure either. I was just trying to sort of
Uh,
feel my way step by step on this one. If we're disagreeing about the rain part, then it seems like at least if you think that I'm your peer about rain, um, then there could be pressure on you to change your mind, not to change your mind in such a way that you would believe
yeah, I
the
couldn't that for the
Morean
whole conjunction, but for one conjunct. Yeah.
contradiction, but yeah, but you switch out the conjunct and then you know um, you would believe, yeah, it's not. I can't remember which of the what the rain belief was that you had that I didn't. But if you started to withhold belief on rain, then that would be a switch in response to the disagreement, even if you didn't then
Yeah.
embrace the Morean conjunction.
Um, Nevertheless, it does seem like what I'm concerned about is not just getting one of the conjuncts. I'm talking about the whole conjunction, and that's what strikes me as so the or a whole big book on these things, the blind spots, and my impression is that we don't have equal access
Yeah.
to all the consistent propositions. That the range of what we can believe is idiosyncratic. Each person has a different sets of blind spots, and that
That sounds
will
right to me.
that so it's harder. So sort of as it were, epistemic space isn't flat; it's bumpy, and we have
Uh huh.
different bumps, and that
Yeah.
means that the evidence can't move us the same way because for sometimes the evidence would have to push us over a bigger bump than for other people,
Uh
and
huh.
then you would get some. Um, I'm not sure how much you're going to get, but you get some disagreement even amongst ideal thinkers. They could have nobody's doing anything wrong, but since it involves a blind spot, one of these, say, these Morean statements, um, then we don't gray out
Yeah.
there.
So you're thinking of a case where I don't know exactly how it would go, but there would be a Morean claim, and in order to
Yeah,
epistemically compromise with your peer, you would have to give a bunch of credence to the
yeah,
Morean claim, which you
right,
can't do on
right. So
in
what
regular
an application
systems,
is
right?
the surprise test paradox. I think the teacher says there's going to be a surprise test next week, and it's going to surprise the students. That's what it means, not their parents. It's going to surprise them. And then you have a clever student say, "Well, you
Right.
can't give it to us on the last day because then on the night
Yeah.
before we'd be able to
Right.
predict which day the exam's on, so we'd foresee it." And then
Yeah.
the really clever step is next step when he said, "Well, could you do it on the previous day?" Well, then I would from the is
Uh,
it that it's either Thursday or Friday? Well, I can see that you can't wait till Friday. So therefore, I can eliminate Thursday as a possible. And then he goes
yeah.
all the way back, all 5 days of the week, or
Right.
all 365 days of the year, or however much. It's a funny, weird kind of slippery slope. And the solution that I like is to say that the teacher can surprise you by giving you the test on the last day, because what would happen is that you would you would no longer find the teacher's announcement credible. The teacher said it would be a surprise test, and that
Yes.
now has the form of you're gonna have a test tomorrow, but you don't know it. And people
Right.
can't know such a proposition. It's a blind spot. Not the students can anyway. If this is,
Right.
it could be true, and
Might be
also more
true.
importantly, their
Right.
parents who are not amongst the surprisees, they can know it because it's
Oh,
not a blind
can
spot
know
for
it.
them. So you can
It's not
imagine the
their
debate
blind
between the
spot. Right. Yeah.
teachers, between the students and their parents. The parents say, study for this test that's going to come tomorrow, and the student.
Yeah. Right.
I would take that to be the puzzle's set up so these are ideal thinkers. So they're so that's an example, a philosophy example of what I think is disagreement amongst ideal thinkers.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know if you think this loses something of the coolness of your example, but a sort of more simple-minded case that might be analogous is if somebody disagrees with me about something that's logically true. Supposing I have a belief in some logical truth and somebody else
Yeah, that's a
disagrees
good
with
kind of
me.
case. I'm kind of appealing to some of the same thing because your point is that here it's a matter of consistency. It doesn't consistency trump everything. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess what I want to say probably in both of these cases is that there are going to be dueling epistemic ideals, and if some great logician is telling me that this logical truth that I'm believing is not actually true, and I think, well, wow, supposing it's fairly complex, and I actually do see how it's true, but he's telling me that I'm messing up. Um, and I think that if I keep on believing it, I'm falling short, ideally, in ignoring evidence that I have made a mistake. On the other hand, if I go ahead and reduce confidence in the logical truth, then I'm, to the extent that I believe the negation of the logical truth, I'm embracing inconsistency. So I kind
It's
of
a
think
kind
I'm
of
screwed
rational
either way
dilemma,
there.
and that generally,
Yeah,
I've heard of
exactly.
rational dilemmas before, and they tend to be kind of these very special circumstances where things are set up so that you must violate one of these norms. But you have a much more wide, tragic vision of them that they're happening at the restaurant and
Yeah,
they're happening all over the place, aren't they?
yeah, I think so. I think that one of the interesting things about taking into account evidence of your own malfunction is that once you start taking it on board, and that evidence can be misleading, right? That you're gonna have evidence that you shouldn't do what actually you should do, um, absent the evidence, and that's gonna cause in lots of cases places where you're going to be ending up violating
Yeah, maybe
some
you can.
natural element of the
So
evidence.
you have these other to get a little bit off of the disagreement stuff. Is logically parallel with you have these scenarios in which someone is worried that they've taken a drug that will addle their reasoning. So they've
Yeah,
done a logic puzzle. They seem, and actually they've done it completely correct. um, and but since they worry that they've been drugged, um, they're not as confident in their answer. And that seems, and so we
right.
that's how we. I think you got us. Most of us do feel that way, that we would lose our confidence if. It may have been just complete placebo that was given to us. So nothing has really been. There hasn't been any kind of damage to our reasoning ability. Yet if you worrying about that possibility, if you're a rational suspicion, then you're in this kind of odd situation where you have conclusive evidence for the right answer, and yet you're not supposed to
Exactly.
go with your conclusive answer. Um,
Yeah, right. And there are definitely people who say
uh,
you have to go with a conclusive answer there.
yeah.
I can't bring
So
myself
here,
to
let me.
buy that. I think taken to its extreme, it's going to say that when you're a pilot and you see the altimeter indicates that you are very probably hypoxic, then if in fact you're not, if the altimeter is malfunctioning, let's say, then you're entirely rational in believing the result of your recent thinking, and I guess practically rational in turning towards the more distant airstrip. And
yeah, it seems to me that
like
you probably could be disciplined for that. if they discovered that that's how you reasoned it out.
Right.
I wouldn't want that pilot.
Yeah. Right.
So that's a. But here's the one thing that worries me about it, though, is that how to work out. So there I am. I'm using this higher order reasoning to bracket what's gone on to some degree, at least. What about that reasoning itself? How do I know my hypoxia hasn't kind of screwed up my higher order reasoning? Hypoxia would screw up everything, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. So, I mean, I guess you have to think that hypoxia is likely to. I mean, I guess you have to be. If you thought that hypoxia was going to make your thinking processes completely crazy in every respect, then I guess you'd be paralyzed. I mean, I think there's some kinds of higher order evidence that you could get which you can't do anything with. But I think, in fact, in the hypoxia example, you can retain enough of your mental composure to, and even on the assumption that you are hypoxic, reason to it being preferable to stick to the flight plan that you arrived at before taking off than the one that you might have drawn up under the
so
conditions.
it's an interesting psychological speculation whether there is something that's a bit insulated from these assaults. So, I mean, hunter-gatherers would get very tired. They've been chasing after the stag a long time, and you can see that people who are sensitive to the higher order evidence are going to have advantages. And so, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I'm not a psychologist, but it seems that you might be able to get evidence that it is a bit quarantined. One of the things that occurred to me, so before you were talking about flight plans, like conservatism seems to be something that becomes attractive. I'll stick to my original plan. I won't try a novelty. If I get worried, then
yeah, if the higher order evidence is targeting your more recent thing.
I'll so maybe there are certain policies that become natural for us. That
and I guess
they're built in to be kind of less risky or something.
Yeah, or it might just be that another dimension of difference might be that under hypoxia I might be able to think some relatively simple thoughts like don't rely on stuff I did under hypoxic conditions, and that I might think that those would be more likely to come out correct than delicate thoughts I had about what the wind speed is and how much fuel is, and all the kinds of delicate things you have to think about when you're figuring out whether you have enough fuel.
Well, those interesting speculations. So we should be wrapping this, but I was just wondering if you have any predictions about the long-term fate of the conciliationism, the equal eight. So right now you think there's disagreement, but I wondered, given your sympathies with Bayesianism, you think that over the long haul, in the next century, 2 centuries from now, we'll all be conciliationists.
I mean, I guess I think that there has already been some pulling together, at least on examples, but I guess at this point I would find it hard to separate the prediction that we're all going to become conciliationists from the belief that conciliationism is true. So I think I shouldn't make that prediction, but it's a hope. It's a hope that I'll keep writing articles, and the first article I wrote, I sort of had a footnote saying, well, if I write this article and people aren't convinced, then I can't be confident in its conclusion. And of course, I was hoping that I would write the article and everyone would be convinced, and I wouldn't have to, pay that.
Yes.
But, sadly, probably predictably, that did not happen. And so I hope that we can all become conciliationists, in which case I can become a conciliationist,
I
not
see.
in bad
Well,
faith.
that's an interesting version. So what scares other people is an object of hope for you. Okay, well, good. Thank you very much, David. And I think this is a good point to end right here.
Okay, it
All
was
right,
great
have a good
talking to
evening.
you.
Bye bye.